So although I forgot to say the word synapse when I was supposed to back when we were looking at the diagram of the neuron, the synapses are really important. So this is where nerves interface with other nerves, where neurons, so the axon of one neuron joins the dendrites of a next neuron. And so these junctions are really important because there's signals transmitted between the two neurons or between neurons and effector cells. So these gaps are called synapses, these joints, and you can have electrical synapses, which are more common in your heart, or you could have chemical synapses that rely on neurotransmitters, which you're probably more familiar with, and those are in more complex parts of our body. I did add a page in at the end of your PowerPoint that's got some interesting neurotransmitters, because these neurotransmitters are what we think of when we talk about our nervous system and our moods. It might be what's in, the your food or your medications, and yeah, we generally have heard about those neurotransmitters. So as an action potential passes along, it's the sending neuron or the presynaptic cell can secrete a chemical signal. And so this chemical signal is a neurotransmitter, because remember, we're talking about a chemical synapse. So the neurotransmitter crosses the gap or the synaptic cleft between the two different neurons. And the neurotransmitter binds to the receptor on the surface of the receiving or postsynaptic cell, opening the cell to new ions and activating another action potential in that new cell. So we need those neurotransmitters in order to kind of make the next neuron fire. And so here we have an image. So this would be the end of, so this is a good kind of diagram here. So we have one nerve cell here, and remember the direction of nerve impulse was from cell body to synapse or down the axon. And so we have the sender and the receiver here. And what we're talking about is that junction between them. And so at that junction between them, we have this export of neurotransmitters into that space, and then the picking up of the neurotransmitters by the receiving neuron. And so we do have different kinds of neurotransmitters. Some of them are broken down, and some of them are reusable. This also is exocytosis. As you remember, that's active transport. So again, this is why it's so tiring to learn. Okay, so we've got this idea that our chemical synapse make a lot of complex information processing possible. And so basically there's different kinds of neurotransmitters. If you're looking at that last sheet as I talk here, you could have neurotransmitters that are excitatory and make the receiving cell fire, or you could have neurotransmitters that are inhibitory, which basically chill out the receiving neuron, and it means that it's not going to have an action potential in it. And so that a neuron can receive information from hundreds of other neurons. So some of those neurons might be releasing excitatory neurotransmitters, and some of them might be releasing inhibitory neurotransmitters. So really, for that receiving neuron, it's basically the overall net effect or the summation of the excitatory or the inhibitory neurotransmitters that are being secreted from that sending neuron. And this is really going to decide if that receiving neuron is actually going to fire. So this is what it looks like. And I've had people try and count this and decide, is this receiving neuron going to fire or not? So you can see all of the connections, all of the synapses where other neurons are interfacing with the dendrites of this receiving neuron. And basically, I think if we counted, and somebody did once for me, basically the summation on this one is that this receiving neuron is going to fire because most of those neurotransmitters are sending an excitatory message. There are a lot of different neurotransmitters. We're not getting anywhere near any level of detail. There is, like I said, that printout that I had put. It's not on the quiz, I guess obviously not this semester, but also, not memorized stuff, but it's interesting. And so there are several small, many of them are nitrogen containing molecules that are neurotransmitters. Some of the big ones would be acetylcholine, and another one would be the biogenic amines as a general sort of classification. So ones that you might have heard about would be serotonin or dopamine. And those are examples of biogenic amines that are neurotransmitters. I like connections that make some sense to me. So I don't have connections to psychoactive drugs, but basically psychoactive drugs do work as at synapses and affect neurotransmitter connection. I drink a lot of coffee, so caffeine uh, blocks the neurotransmitter adenosine. And adenosine's normal job is to slow the cell down. And so adenosine would be inhibitory as a neurotransmitter. But if caffeine gets in the way of that, that means that I'm not going to slow down. I'm going to wake up and I'm going to talk faster. And so without the action of adenosine, we've got a stimulated nerve cell. And on top of not just blocking the slow down or chill out, it's actually going to stimulate the nerve cell to release epinephrine or adrenaline. And so that's why caffeine wakes you up. Caffeine can also increase levels of dopamine. So there's often multifaceted responses in your body for one molecule that you're inter, inter sorry, introducing to your body. Nicotine, another one I don't really have a lot of experience with, but it is a stimulant or it is an excitatory effect as far as neurotransmitters go. And again, if you want to read more details, there's lots on that final page that was added to your PowerPoint. Other alcohol is a depressant or is inhibitory when we look at its effect on your nervous system and neurotransmitters. Other things, serotonin is one that's usually a good one. So some antidepressants increase the amount of time that serotonin is present. And so like in that previous video, there is sometimes that breakdown of neurotransmitters. And so some antidepressants work by slowing down how fast the serotonin is broken down. The last part of our notes on the nervous system is pretty quick. It's really just a little bit about your central nervous system and about the human brain. And it is amazing. I think we're only at the beginning of really understanding how powerful our brains are. So we do have the hindbrain and the forebrain. The hindbrain is the brainstem and the cerebellum, whereas the forebrain is the more sophisticated and integrating stuff. So this is sort of like the base, and this is the extra. So we've got the cerebrum, the hypothalamus, the thalamus, and the cerebellum's back here. And so we do have it. The forebrain is divided into the left and the right. And you know, some people talk about how you are left-brained or right-brained, but basically most of us have actions on both, I would hope. So this is just a diagram. If you're taking a psychology course, you've already done this one. I'm just going to leave it here relatively quick because it's often covered in other courses. These are the functions of the different components of your brain. And really, the outer region of the cerebrum or the cerebral cortex is really what we're talking about oftentimes when we talk about our conscious brain. And it's highly folded. It's most of your brain mass. And it's basically, you know, your uh, sensory receptors. And so we've got vision, hearing, taste, and smell. Boy, this is poorly edited. We've also got your motor cortex, that is your motor functions. You know, you've got your language and your thinking. And basically how we use our brains changes its structure and its function. It is amazing the ability that brains have to heal. And so we talk about that as neural plasticity or organ plasticity, in that you can rewire a brain. And oftentimes traumatic brain injuries, patients have to deal with that, and it takes time, but it is amazing that we can heal this so complicated organ in our bodies. So a little bit more of the lobes and the different sensory motor sort of connections that are mapped on the brain. And basically, as we talk about health and wellness, understanding brain function is really, really important. So we could talk about your limbic system, which is basically involved in your emotions, your memory, and your learning. And so as a student, you want to develop this in you. And it's why when you get stressed out, it actually decreases your memory and learning. And so hopefully you're not feeling stressed out at the end of the semester here. Memory is the ability to store and retrieve information, and it is essential for learning. There's several things that unfortunately can go wrong with our brain. And again, really stressing the understanding of your nervous system and your brain can really enhance our health and wellness. And so these are common things that do affect your brain or your central nervous system. So schizophrenia, Alzheimer's disease is a form of dementia, generally in older age, but there is early onset Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's disease. Again, has a genetic component to it, but also devastating for folks as they get diagnosed because there's no cure as we know it. So all of these things definitely do affect your health and wellness, but understanding how your brain works can actually enhance your take on understanding chapter 31.